Have you ever wanted to know what Catholic Charities of Louisville really does? Well, we're here today with the head honcho herself, Lisa DeJaco Crutcher, today on Spirit Inspire, starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Welcome to another episode of Spirit Inspire. I'm your host today, Chuck Obichefu, and joining with me today is my co-host, John Soul.
Hey, Chuck. Good to see you doing this for the first time as host. Nice to see you.
Yes. I'll try not to bungle it. With our esteemed guest today from the hollers of northern Italy.
Quite some time ago
to the Derby City, Chief Executive Officer of Catholic Charities, Lisa DeJaco Crutcher.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a gift.
All right, so kick off. Okay, man, we're getting right into it.
Of course. So,
Lisa, I had the pleasure of meeting you through the board for St. Joseph's Children's Home, and that was a great experience. I did not know who you were prior to that. I heard about you, but I did not know how much of a pivotal role that you were playing in the community through Catholic Charities. Can you kind of give us, your matriculation from commercial litigator into what's good facilitator of the charitable impulses of the Catholic Church here in Louisville?
Sure thing. So first, just on the personal note, you mentioned this. So I am a lawyer by training.
Yes.
I started my career here in Louisville at Wyatt Turner & Combs. I began as a summer associate even, and then worked my way up to becoming a partner. And then I had practiced for 17 years when I left the practice of law to move to Catholic Charities as the chief executive officer, which was really a journey, right? I mean, I had only ever intended to be a lawyer, but for all the way back when I was a kid. I read something the other day that said, so many people become lawyers because people told them that as a child, you should be a lawyer, without realizing that was not a compliment.
LOL, yeah.
That's amazing.
So I was, from an early age, told I should be a lawyer and went to law school and really enjoyed it. I love the law, I do. And I always really enjoyed my coworkers. But probably about 15 years into my practice, which was going well. I mean, I was thriving as a practicing attorney and doing all the things that you hope to be doing as you sort of mature to that level of practice. But I started to really have this very strong sense that I had something else I was supposed to be doing. I remember one day very clearly sitting in my office looking out the window, and it was just about a block from here in the old PNC building, the one on 5th Street. Looking out the window at the river from my 26th floor office and thinking, everything has a season and the season for this is ending.
Wow.
And I thought, whoa, where'd that come from? Right?
Wow.
What now? So it was a process for me of about a year and a half of really just discernment, right? Thinking, okay, if I weren't doing this, what would I be doing? This is the job I always intended to have. And,
you're at the highest rungs.
Right.
Of
yeah,
that
sure.
job.
And like I said, things were going well. I didn't have any professional reason to leave, but I just really was feeling this very strong pull of the spirit, that there's nothing wrong with this, but this is not what I intend for you, forever.
And just so people understand, I'm a average lawyer, but I want to explain to people that don't have context for it. You're how much of I won't say it's not diametrically opposed because you're in a leadership role at your firm, but being a commercial litigator is very different from being a leader of a not-for-profit, especially a not-for-profit doing what you're doing now.
For sure. And, Wyatt Turner & Combs is one of the oldest and largest law firms in Kentucky. And many of our clients, are well-known names, right? I mean, when I left, I had a case for Churchill Downs. I had a case for Ducks Unlimited, which is a big national level nonprofit that we had an office in Memphis, and they're headquartered in Memphis. The last thing I did was a copyright and trademark infringement lawsuit in federal court in Memphis.
Whoa.
Wow.
Right. So that's the kind of stuff that I was doing. I mean, really, pretty big, significant stuff. And yet I felt very strongly that this was not intended to be the rest of my professional life. Yeah. So I had always been pretty involved in nonprofit work. Wyatt has a great tradition of, sending its young lawyers out into the community to be involved in that kind of work. And so I had been on a number of different boards. And a couple of those were kind of coming to their natural ending points. And so I thought, well, rather than just join whatever comes along, I'm really going to find something that really speaks to my heart. Maybe that's going to solve this feeling that I should be doing something more than I'm doing.
Yeah. Wow.
And so I joined a couple boards that were really meaningful to me personally. One of them was Dare to Care's board, the food bank.
Oh, yeah.
And I got really involved. They had some governance stuff that needed sorting out at the time, which fit really nicely with my skill set, right? So I was doing a lot with the board right away. And then starting to realize, I'm actually really enjoying this part more than I'm enjoying my work.
Yeah.
And so I had served on the board at Volunteers of America. I had been the chair of the board there while they had gone through a leadership transition a year or two before. And the former CEO, she would not like me to call her the old CEO, the former CEO, Janie Burks, who was an amazing, wonderful mentor for me. She had spent a 20-year career in commercial banking before she moved into nonprofit management.
Wow.
And so I called her up and said, hey, Janie, can I come and have some coffee with you and just talk a little bit about, one, why did you do that? And then secondly, how did you do that? Like, what was the transition process like? And how did you make that change from a corporate for-profit background, different from mine, but, same kind of thing, into this nonprofit space. And so Janie was great, and we had lots of good talks. And she also introduced me to some people in the nonprofit space that she knew who had come from a legal background. And so everybody seemed to have somebody else I should talk to. So like I said, I was not in a huge hurry. I wasn't unhappy where I was, but everybody sort of had some other recommendation. And so over the course of about 1.5 years, 2 years, what I realize now is that I was sort of getting myself comfortable with the idea that my skills would transfer and that I had something to offer in this space, right? And so, one person would have someone else. And so 6 weeks later, I'd meet this other person for coffee and, kind of just moving through this. And then in August of, 2016, there was an ad in the classified section of the Record. I do not always read the classified section of the Record, but on this particular week, I happened to notice that Catholic Charities had an ad in the Record that their longtime leader was retiring after 24 years.
Wow.
And it was interesting even because the way that the ad was written, it didn't say, we're looking for someone with a master's degree in social work and 10 years of supervisory experience, right? Because that clearly would disqualify me. And I would have thought, no.
Right, you would think that, right?
Right. But it was written very broadly in terms of, we're looking for someone who will have leadership experience in the community, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, is that for me? Right? Should I? And I cut that ad out of the Record. And it also said that they would be taking resumes for like 6 weeks. So I cut it out of the Record and I put it in my bag. And
in 2016, you cut an ad out of...
I carried it around in my bag for like 6
No snapshot.
And every so often I would be, digging around for something in my bag and I would pull it out and I would just take a little minute and sort of sit with it in prayer. Are you talking to me? Should I do something with this?
It's like the Holy Spirit was tapping.
Yeah.
And getting louder
Absolutely.
and louder.
Absolutely.
Because you were sensitive.
And even all the way through, like right as the final week of this, something had happened with my travel schedule. I had a snafu and I ended up spending a whole day by myself, which never happened. I had 2 very small children at the time. Like I never had a whole day alone, like for quiet reflection. And then it was a Saturday and I went to Mass. My husband was supposed to be joining me and his flight had gotten screwed up. And so I said, well, I'm going to go to Mass before you get here. I mean, I don't mean any disparagement to him, but he's happy to have me get that out of the way before he comes, right? And so I'm going to go to Mass without you, and then I'll pick you up at the airport after. And since we're lost a day on this trip, we'll get started. So I went to Mass alone at the cathedral in Denver, which is beautiful. But I remember as I walked in saying, all right, Lord, we've been talking about this all day. If you've got a message for me, you want me to hear it, now's your chance. I walk in and I sit down, and the gospel was the Gospel of Matthew. You cannot serve God and money.
Oh, wow.
And I was thinking, wow, okay. Anyone else here think that maybe this is directed at them? And the priest, there's plenty of ways to preach that gospel, right? But the priest spent the whole homily saying, God doesn't just want your money. God wants your time. God wants your service. God wants your heart. And I was like, okay.
Boom, 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 arrows. Just,
right?
wow.
So what you thought,
So-
what you thought was like, you know, someone pointing at you, like this is for you, was really him grabbing.
Absolutely.
Like you're so like, come here, come here, come here.
Oh,
Absolutely. Well, the last thing I'll say, because we've talked about this long enough, is
I
that
love
one of my partners at the law firm, the head of the litigation department, Don Kelly, great man, devout Catholic. After I took the job, he would tell me, he had this running joke with me. The chancellor is a friend of his. And whenever he would see him, he would tell him, you're dead to me. You're dead to me. And so right as I was about to leave, I had a long time before I gave about 10 weeks notice because I had some things I needed to professionally tie up. So one of the last weeks I was there, Don comes by, he sticks his head in my office. He says, I saw the Archbishop this weekend. I said, Don, you did not tell the Archbishop that he's dead to you. He said, no, but I did tell him that he said some nice things, you know, thanking me for, which of course is not my place. But, you know, I told him, I said, I had been praying that she would stay. And the Archbishop gave me that sweet little smile of his and said, but I was praying she would go.
LOL. Was this Archbishop Kurt?
That was Archbishop Kurt.
Oh, wow. We
Yeah.
had him on the show. Wow.
That's awesome.
So yeah, very much a sense that I was called into this job and that this is where God wants me to be, at least for now. I don't know that it's necessarily forever, but
Sure.
for now, for sure.
I was listening to Father Mike Schmitz, the Minnesotan Ascension. I think it's Ascension.
Yeah, I love Father Mike Schmidt.
He's awesome.
He was saying that vocation is where your greatest desire meets the world's greatest need.
Yes, I
Yeah.
remember that video.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
which I thought, man, that's
deep.
yeah.
It
It's
is
like,
deep.
so would you? I mean, because there are a lot of people going through, you know, transitions, and maybe they feel they're in the right spot, but they're like, why? Like I have my dream job, or I'm in my dream like place, house, whatever, but I feel like a tug, right, from Holy Spirit, from, you know, Christ, whether it's coming from prayer or family or, you know, community, to something else, right? But I can't be in a good thing going to a better thing, can I?
Right.
Like this is the best thing. What is?
Yeah.
Do you feel that what Father Schmidt was describing was sort of what you were falling into, or you fallen into?
I think that this is something that either I read or someone said to me, but you know, that God's dream for you is bigger and better than anything that you might dream for yourself, right? Yeah. So you have your own conceptions of what the best could be in your life, but that's only because you don't really know all of the other ways that God might use your life for your blessing, but also for the blessing of the world. And so I think it's Pope Francis has said, you know, that we can't do anything better than put ourselves in the attitude of Mary. You know, Lord, what you want, when you want, how you want. I'm here. You steer me where I need to be. Yeah. And I continue to try to have that in my life. I don't know that I'm necessarily great at it all the time, but, you know, that's, I think the goal is to just say, okay, Lord, I'm here right now. And I think this is where you want me to be and what you want me to be doing. But if that changes and there's something else I should go, help me to stay open to the movement of your spirit, you know, just so, because I think that there are often signs, right? The Lord does speak into your heart when there's things that dissatisfaction, that sense that maybe there's something more, or there's something else out there, you know, that starts to grow. And if you pay attention and are open to seeing what's happening, you know, over and over. And it still happens to me today. I mean, my job right now is rough. right? Catholic Charities there's a lot going on in the nonprofit world at this time, and it's mostly not good. And I have had, I'd say probably in January and February, 6 different people, some who worked for me, some who worked elsewhere for the church, some who were not even affiliated with my job, say to me, I'm so glad that they have you right now. You're exactly where you need to be. I'm like, okay. All right, I hear you. After the third or fourth, I was like, I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to keep
we
drilling that in.
We definitely want to touch on that lightly. I was about to lose my train of thought. Please, before we shift to that, because that's definitely something I want to touch on. Because I'm very interested in your development, right? Your Catholic development, right? And to being, because I think it's even more. It takes a lot of formation to even get into the point where you're that sensitive to, being where you are is very career oriented to those types of huge life transitions, right? So I'm sure was something that you had to discuss with your family and stuff like that. Like from growing up, like were your parents involved in your what was Lisa's childhood like?
Yeah.
Was she that receptive younger? Or was
what
she
predisposed you to this?
So I am from a big Catholic family on both sides.
We were talking about that.
We were talking earlier. So my mom's family is 6 generations back here in Louisville, German Catholics, your sort of classic Louisville Catholic pedigree. My dad's family's from Northern Kentucky, again, very, very deep in their faith. But when my parents were married in the 70s, they were both in this rebellious 1970s phase where we're gonna, we don't need religion and our kids will figure it out for themselves. It goes great, right?
Right.
And so I was not baptized as an infant. We didn't go to Catholic school. There was none of that. Wow. My parents got divorced in the early 80s. And my dad, it sort of in the years following that, came back to the church. But he was not our custodial parent. So we lived with my mom, who still does not go to church, except for she only goes to church when my family has some sort of observation, right? She's there for my kids' baptisms and first communion. She goes to funeral masses, but that's about it.
Yeah.
But my grandmother, who was essentially our second parent, was a very devout Catholic. If you happened to be with my grandmother on Tuesday, you were going to the Novena Mass at St. Boniface, because that's what she did every Tuesday, right? So she was very much a woman of a really deep and abiding faith, although not someone who talked about it a lot. You saw it in her life, but she was not. It wasn't until my adulthood that she and I were able to have some conversations about her faith. But so even as a child, I was of it, but not in it. Except that spending time with my extended family, it was everywhere. My dad's parents had that classic picture of the Last Supper was on the wall in the kitchen, all of this. And whenever you were there for the weekend, you went to Mass on Sunday because that's what they did. Mm-hmm. But I didn't realize until I was probably 8 that I was not Catholic because at 8, suddenly my cousin who was my age was able to take communion and I was not.
Wow.
And I was like, wait, how come she gets to go?
Wow.
Well, she's had her first communion. Well, why haven't I had my first communion? Well, because you're not Catholic. What do you mean I'm not Catholic? I'm here with the rest of you,
Conversations with parents need to be had.
Yeah. So it was very much something that I felt the lack of.
Yeah.
And then when I was a freshman in high school, my dad got remarried. And my stepmom converted to Catholicism. I think she was Methodist or something before. And I remember thinking, oh, you can do that? How does that work? Right? And so I asked, and they talked to me a little bit about, how the process had worked for her. And then my dad actually called my grandmother, so his ex-mother-in-law, who was here in town, and talked to her about, and it turned out that she had already had some conversations with the priest about, what if my granddaughter wants to do this? She shouldn't be with the kids. How would this work if we had a teenager? And so I did RCIA in high school and was baptized and confirmed at 16.
I've run into so many, there's so many people, my older brother being one of them, who have been Catholic their whole life, but not officially Catholic their whole life. Like, you know, kind of like spotty.
Catholic, kind of in name only,
cultural
but
Catholic,
cultural Catholic.
right?
Yeah, that's been a problem recently.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those.
Yeah.
I think, I mean,
many of us are.
I don't mean to be offensive to anybody who might be listening to this, but Louisville has a lot of that.
Yeah.
Right? We have a lot of people who think, oh, I went to Catholic school, therefore I am Catholic, right? I was baptized as a child and I went to Catholic school and so I'm Catholic. Right.
But what does that mean?
Right. Did I get married in the church? 50-50. Right. You know, but if I have a child, I'll have that child baptized and then I won't take them back to church until it's time to go to Catholic school.
I think there's a lot of Catholic identity without a lot of Catholic purpose or a Catholic lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, I feel like, I mean, I know it is, right? Because I saw in it growing up in Atlanta, you know, like, you know, a parent will baptize this kid, put them through the process, skip this kid because it's a lot of work, and then the next kid, and then
or you sometimes you see them baptizing two kids at once because they realize they didn't do the older one.
Yes.
And now they're catching up. Like we've got a 3-year-old and an infant because we want the 3-year-old we want to send to Catholic school, and we've just realized that if they're not baptized, that we don't get the parish rate. Right?
Right. Oh my gosh.
You run into, like, I know it's not this, right? But I feel that some of these families sometimes think that it's kind of sort of like a check the box type of thing, and they're frustrated, right? But it wasn't that way. But in your instance, it was you, right, driving this, like, hey, I haven't come into the fullness of the faith, right? But you weren't thinking about it that way, right. But you recognize the hallmarks of it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't your parents driving it at all.
No.
Is that is that
that's amazing.
Is that common? Have you found this common? Like, it's the
I don't think there's a whole lot of people who do that at that age, but I do think that yearning, especially among people who are raised without a faith, right? I think that people do feel maybe not everybody, but a lot of people feel that absence of something. And I was lucky, I think, blessed, depending on how you want to look at it, that I had, even though I didn't have it in my immediate family, even though I didn't have it in my home, I had a context, right? So because I had my grandmother and my dad's whole family, like I saw what it was supposed to look like, right? So it was easy for me to sort of opt into that.
You saw the ideal, even if it wasn't right in front of you all the time.
I think somebody who grows up really without any context at all,
That's
and
harder.
I can think of people that I know who fall into this category. If you feel that yearning, but you don't have any idea where to start with it, right? Like what then, how do you have the opportunity to plug in and connect that? You know, maybe you're lucky to have, you know, a close friend in college or something who has a deep faith where you see it and you're like, hey, can I go with you sometime? Or they say to you, do you want to come? You know, but until you have the opportunity sort of being extended to you, some sort of entrance ramp, you know, I think it's really hard for someone just out of nowhere, even though they're feeling that tug, they may not know what that tug is until they're able to contextualize it.
And we as Catholics have a responsibility to like kind of become an instrument of that, or maybe like attract people just with our joy, with our disposition, because they're like, I don't have context, but I want what you have, and I don't know what you have, and I want to know what it is.
Yeah.
And that draws them naturally.
So one of the greatest compliments of my life came from a dear friend now who was one of my associates when I was at the law firm. So he's, 10, 15 years younger than I am. And he grew up in a Baptist tradition and told me when he was in college, especially law school, I think, sort of grew away. He's from a small town, so very like whatever your stereotype is of like a very small town Baptist church, like that's what he was raised in, right? And kind of engaged the wider world and realized like, this ain't it, right? And especially when he got to law school, because that tradition is so much about, you follow the Bible. It's what's in the Bible. And he was like, I am now being trained to read everything 3 or 4 different ways, right? Like this cannot be it. Yeah. And so for a few years, he really was sort of without a religious tradition because he just felt like that's not it. And I don't know where I'm going. But he met a young woman who was Catholic and also practicing at this law firm. He knew me and he knew Don Kelly, who I mentioned earlier, who he said, I look to you all and I see smart people who are also people of deep faith. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking at that thinking, well, this tradition works for them. Maybe it can also work for me. And I thought, wow, what an amazing thing that without any way to know that you're doing it, to be able to present an example for someone of a thoughtful person who's also a person of deep faith. And of course, our tradition is so rich and so deep, and there's so many, many layers to it and so much to learn that I think for a thinking person, it's a natural home.
There's I think it was John, like our friend John Biggs. He so what does he say? He's like text without context is just pretext. Right?
Ooh, that's nice. Ooh. Very clever.
And then another guest we had on the show here. He was Quaker, right? He said something that I thought it's always stuck with me, is that, like, what if the only gospel someone sees is your life? Like that's the Quaker motto or something like that.
You might be the only Bible anyone ever reads.
That's pretty amazing.
And so it's pretty exemplary that you're, someone's that has that yearning and they're able to see the example lived out in your life, right? And it wasn't like, hey, let's take you aside and let's have a conversation. Let me tell you about the gospel. Right. It's like, man, I've been in the trenches with this person, right? I've seen their daily walk, and I want that. Like, I want whatever it is that they got a hold of, because it speaks to them. That's
Catholicism is embodied, right? It's an incarnate witness in that sense. And I have a question, Lisa.
Yeah.
So you have you started around August 2016, is what you said?
April 2016. April 2017.
April of 2017.
So I started, the sort of process for looking at the job was in August of 16. And then I took the job in January. But like I said, there was like a lag.
This period of time of discernment and prayer. That's magnificent. As you mentioned that timeline, I thought of my own life and what was going on. And that was right after my grandma had passed away. We had just gone to World Youth Day for Poland in the Year of Mercy. Mm-hmm. And mercy is all about the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. Yeah. And I picked up on that at that time, but it was only in looking back on it that I realized that was also the time my work, Family Renewal Project, was founded around that time. Mm-hmm. But also in August of 2016, Pope Francis, right after World Youth Day, established an 8th work of mercy called Care for God's Creation.
Nice.
Right? And he didn't specify, is this corporal, is this spiritual? Right. He said it was both.
Yeah.
And you have corporal works of mercy that a lot of people gravitate to the obvious service of our bodily needs. Right. But you also have the spiritual works of mercy that other Catholics oftentimes gravitate toward because of the need to teach the faith, instruct the ignorant, admonish sinners, all of those spiritual things. But sometimes I've noticed in the church, there is a divide. Mm-hmm. And it drives me insane. It's like, when you divide the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, it is no different than dividing body and soul.
Right.
And what Pope Francis did was like bringing them together. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to the importance of bringing together the works of mercy?
Absolutely. I think this is so essential to the way in which we engage the people that we serve at Catholic Charities. So one of our value statements or whatever is the value of welcome. And we talk a lot about the values of Catholic social teaching and how they undergird our work. And so the sort of bedrock value of Catholic social teaching is the life and dignity of every human being. So, for instance, we operate a big food pantry down in the West End at Sister Visitor Center at 23rd and Market Street. And that pantry is open 5 days a week. It sees literally hundreds of folks a month. And it's set up as a choice pantry, which means it's set up like a little grocery store. And the people who come, they get checked in, and, they're either already in the system or we talk through, their family circumstances or whatever. And then they get a certain number of points with which they shop through the store. They have a volunteer who shops with them. And I think it's so important that people are met and greeted and then accompanied throughout the store, right? Someone talks to you. It's not just that you're here and we give you a bag.
Here's some stuff.
Yeah, right? But someone talks and literally walks with you through the store, talks about your family, talks about your needs. You have these points like, do you want 2 cans of tuna, or would you rather have a can of tuna and a can of peanut butter, right? What works for you? Oh, no, I don't care for peanut butter. Okay, great. No peanut butter for you, right? So it not only cuts down on food waste, which is important and a big priority for us, it not only helps people make healthier choices and gives them an opportunity for, looking and meeting the needs that they actually have, and instead of just giving them a bag of things that they may or may not be able to use. But also it gives this opportunity for accompaniment, and it raises up their dignity.
I knew it. That's it.
It gives
right
them
there.
back the dignity of choice.
Yeah.
To be able to say, I don't actually like, white. If you have rye bread, I'd love some rye bread, right? To recognize and lift that up. And we know how much it means to people. We do surveys with clients. We know how much it means to them because they tell us. We also know by the usage of the pantry, which every pantry in Louisville right now sees increased usage because of everything that's happening with grocery prices, obviously. But the usage of that pantry has quadrupled. And if you look at the pantries around it in the West End, where they're all seeing increases, you can see that nobody's increase is even close to the increase at our pantry, which we moved to this choice model during the COVID time period. We took advantage of the time that the pantry was physically closed. We were still giving food out, but nobody was coming in, to redesign it into this choice model. And you can see how much it means to people. And I think that's really important. So many of our programs, maybe all of them really, we're coming alongside people and we're walking with them. And again, in accordance with our Catholic teaching of subsidiarity, we're not trying to do for them the things that they can do for themselves, but we're giving them the tools and the resources and the skills and the company that they need to make their own life decisions. And then supporting them as they go through these things for themselves. So one of our programs is, we have an ombudsman program, which works in all of the long-term care facilities in Jefferson County, all of the surrounding counties, which is called the KIPTA region, and then the next region down, which is the Lincoln Trail region, and that's Bardstown and E-Town and all of those sort of the next swath of counties, right? And so it's about 125 facilities, about 10,000 residents. Which is, right? It's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
And part of the purpose of that program is ombudsman is the Swedish word for advocate. So partly we're helping people advocate, but more we're really trying to help them amplify their own voice where they are. Just because you're living in a facility doesn't mean you're not a person anymore. Doesn't mean you don't still have preferences and hopes, and nobody should have to live the rest of their life never eating eggs the way they like it again, right? So how can we help you work within the system, engage with the staff or the other residents or whatever it is, to address the things that you're experiencing in a way that's going to make your life better.
That's wow.
That's the difference between a hand up and a hand out.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, on the one hand, it's a corporal work of mercy, right? You're visiting the sick and the aged. But on the other hand, really, it's also this spiritual work, right? Where you're connecting with people.
Yeah.
There was this quote. I think it was out of this podcast. I can't remember what it was, but it was some hedge fund executive, kind of justifying sort of the market things that we're seeing right now, right? They're coming top down. And he was like, he basically was quoting Thucydides, like the strong do what they can and the weak do what they must, right? But what came out of my mind as soon as I heard that was that that's completely reversed by Christ. It says it's the meek that inherit the earth, right? And I'm listening to what you're saying is that just because, people have like a food pantry is someone's only option, right? Or the option of last resort. Why does that mean that there should be an absence of agency, even in having to, be at the level where you need to have, the hand up, right? The subsidiary resources to supplement your daily living, like eating, right? Sustenance, like why does it mean that doing what you must is hand in hand with a loss of dignity, right? A loss of respect, right? And I think a lot of people, when they think about charity, right, there's, I guess it's like poor, that's like they don't have a lot of options, right? But I don't think going to charity is should be where you lose your options. It should be when you realize you have more than you have more options than you think, right? And it's up to people to kind of give people a different perspective, right? Like if I'm a single mother for wondering like how am I going to put food on the table for my kids, and I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and I walk into a food pantry, the last thing I think is that I'm going to have a choice, right, walking into a place like that, but to be reminded about that, to be given the perspective that you do have a choice, right? Like your decisions here matter, right? Because you said the nutritional value of the food that you're picking up, you said helping them make healthier choices in terms of the options in a scarce situation. I'm sure you see it every day, like psychologically, spiritually, sociologically, right? For the individual and families, it's making a difference. You said you were seeing it in your surveys as well too.
And I think it's so important to recognize, we're all called to family and participation, and like this is part of our call, is that people should not be marginalized, right? They should be brought into whatever your financial circumstances might be. You're a beloved child of God. How are we conveying that to everybody that we're encountering, right? How are we making sure that everybody who needs corporal help, right, is still being recognized and uplifted as God's beloved? Right? What are we doing to make sure that we are conveying that message? And sometimes I think people feel, oh, well, it's Catholic Charities, but, you don't pray with people, so it's not really like you're spiritually.
Well, you can if you have the relationship with the people. Sure.
Or if somebody is, if that's their tradition and but, it's not a question we ever ask anybody, are you Catholic, before we give you help, right? Like we wouldn't.
Not Catholic? Sorry.
No. Well,
not in the club.
For us, that seems ridiculous, but there are other faith traditions that do that. If you want to get their help, you got to come to the Bible study first. The meal only comes after, the proselytizing. And that's not how we think Christ has called us to engage people. If you look all the way back into the very early days of the church, you see that what drew people to the church was the care that they took for others.
It's like a true gratuitous generosity, without counting the cost, measuring, keeping score.
Right.
It's the road to Emmaus, where Jesus accompanied them. He listened to them. And then only through the listening, through the allowing them to share, that he was able to be in a position to break open Scripture and teach them and guide them directly, giving them the whatever you want to call proselytizing. But it's not that. It's more like using getting in touch with their heart in a way to give them what they need as far as the substance of the gospel that will speak most to them and bring healing to their hearts. And what happens? Were not our hearts burning within us when he shared that? But only because they trusted him, only because they felt loved and heard by him, seen by him.
That's great. I love that gospel story. I think it can be so. Sometimes we're afraid to encounter people in that way. Whether it's in our personal life or, in my case, in a professional context. It seems like sometimes people don't want to talk about their faith. They don't want to bring that to the table because it feels like either it's too personal, like you're putting yourself out there in a way that feels uncomfortable, or you feel like maybe you're intruding into their personal space, right? You don't want to,
especially in professional circles.
Yeah.
Like I don't think I ever said the word Jesus in any professional circle until I came to Louisville. And you know, it's okay.
You can talk about Jesus.
Like, because you're trained like to be this, you know,
secular
robot, you know, like happy winter time, you know, like like you can't, like, oh God, did you say Christmas? That's a demerit for you, sir. You know, like it really is. You're like because you're and because you're looking at people's reactions, like, he's talking about, you know.
So we had a priest who worked with us at Catholic Charities briefly. He was not a diocesan priest. He was an order priest, and that he got called back by his order some time ago, so we don't have him anymore. But he had this great analogy with our staff. So many of the staff at Catholic Charities are not Catholic. I'd say maybe 20% maybe 25% of our staff are Catholic.
Are Catholic?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so many of them are not. Some are from other Christian traditions. Some don't have any particular religious affiliation whatsoever. Sure. But also because a lot of one of our major programs for many years has been refugee resettlement. And a lot of our staff who work in that department are former refugees themselves. We have Muslim staff. We have Hindu staff, right? So we have a whole gamut of people working at Catholic Charities.
I noticed in the entryway, because you were saying about the welcome thing, you have welcome written in a bunch of different languages. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the wall has all of these different languages that have been the primary languages of communities we've resettled here in Louisville over the last 50 years. Yeah. So you've got Burmese and Kinyarwanda and, you know, Swahili and Arabic and, you know, all just Bosnian, all kinds of things, which is just really, it's really cool. But anyway, the father used to, he gave a really great talk to our staff once about Catholic identity and spoke about, he said, if I invited you to my house for dinner, and I had, like, you know, what we sort of think of as like a stereotypical American meal, right? Like we had burgers and hot dogs, like you would appreciate it. We'd have a good time. It'd be a fun time and a nice meal, and you wouldn't think about it again. But if I invited you to my house for dinner and I greeted you with a meal that I had made of all of my like family recipes, like all the stuff that my family has like traditionally eaten forever, and I told you, you know, I'm so excited you've come because this is all my family's like our great stuff, right? You would come away feeling so honored. Right? Wouldn't you have like this amazing sense of, wow, like he really welcomed me. Like that was amazing. And I really feel like I know him now in this totally different way. And it's not that it's not that I would say to you, if you don't eat these family recipes that come from my culture, if you don't eat this at home, I don't want you here. That's not how you would feel at all. No. You would feel so really blessed to share this tradition that is not my tradition. And then maybe you're going to invite me to your house sometime and we'll eat your family traditions and we'll talk about, you know, your family's cultural ways. And that'll be really meaningful, and it will bring both of us to a better understanding and love for each other. So if we can think and understand through that in the food context, we can also think about how that works in terms of our prayer traditions and our other cultural traditions. So yeah, this agency is Catholic, and that's our tradition. But we welcome everybody else's traditions as part of it, and we hope you'll bring it to the table.
Well, yeah, because weren't the people on the road to Emmaus walking away from Jerusalem? They were walking in the wrong direction, right? So if we're looking at the Catholic Church as the one true church, the fullness of truth as Jesus gave us, we have to hold to that, but not hold to that by shoving it in people's faces, right? But in this open-ended threshold of generosity and hospitality. Yeah. Because when you break bread together, as you're talking about, like when you actually allow yourself to sit in the space of someone who has a totally different worldview, totally different perspective, totally different faith, does that not give them the opportunity to see what you have and want that?
Yeah.
So
that's so good.
I'm sure one of the communities that you service they're probably from, you know, Afghanistan or Pakistani, right? And they have this tradition there of Pashtunwali, right? Where, if it doesn't matter if they're a stranger off the road, you welcome them into your home as if they're like part of your family. They have a seat there. You break bread with them. You treat them as, because you would want the same from anyone else if you were, destitute on the road and didn't have anywhere else to turn into. So I definitely understand it's sad that, I guess, outside of more, I don't know, maybe the Midwest and the South, you don't really see that in American culture, right? But in other cultures, that's the lingua franca, right?
Yeah.
Of hospitality, right? Like they're everyone that you're welcoming your home to, their family, right? And you share with them as if you would share with your own blood. Transitioning into those programs that you're offering through Catholic Charities, I guess there's a lot to unpack there. You've given us a snapshot to tell us, like, what is Catholic Charities' mission, especially within, I guess, globally, as an organization, but then in the Louisville context, and then maybe describe some of the recent challenges that the organization is facing.
Yeah. So every diocese in the country has a Catholic Charities in some form. Sometimes they're called something different, Catholic Social Services or whatever. But every diocese in the world has a Catholic Charities, because Catholic Charities is the social ministry of the church.
Is that like in canon law? It has to be, or is that just?
I think it's just the nature of the church, right? Yeah. And Deus Caritas, as Pope Benedict said, the three essential elements of the church are preaching the gospel, administering the sacraments, and the exercise of charity. The church cannot exist without any one of those three things.
That's cool.
Right? So that's the essence of the church. That you have to be doing those things or you're not the church. So everybody's got, in some way, some form of social ministry, some form of outreach to carry out those corporal works of mercy. And
they're not like from like an entity perspective connected to like some mothership entity.
No, so we have an umbrella organization in the U.S., Catholic Charities USA. I was actually just there earlier this week. Twice a year they have a gathering. The one in the fall is for like any staff. The one in the spring is specifically for people who have my role, right? So people who are what we call the diocesan director of Catholic Charities. And we all get together and talk about what's going on. And, and we had a ton of people there this time because there's a lot happening. And we really needed, I think, the solace of being in communion with each other to talk about, some of all the things that people are dealing with. But it's not an umbrella in the sense that, like, the head of Catholic Charities USA, a woman named Carrie Alice Robinson, like, she's not my boss. The Archbishop is my boss, right?
Oh, okay.
In every diocese, the bishop is responsible for the material needs of the people in his diocese, not just the Catholic people, all the people. Right? And spiritually and materially.
That's key.
Your responsibility as the shepherd is for the well-being of the people in your diocese.
So the analogy of the Archbishop as the mayor of the Catholics is not accurate.
No. The Archbishop is the shepherd of everybody, Catholic or not.
Beautiful. I love
just
that.
As the Pope is the father of the world. You don't have to accept him, but he's still responsible for you.
Well, I had no. It's not just everyone that's a registered parishioner been born into it's everyone within the geographic boundaries of.
Right. This is his territory. This is his flock. He is responsible for the spiritual and material well-being of everyone within his diocese.
And that's your boss.
And that's my boss.
That's cool.
And his boss is responsible for the whole world.
The whole world, right.
And as my good friend from Atlanta said when I took this job, let me get this straight. Your boss's boss is Jesus. That's right.
Amen.
3 steps down.
That's legit.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
There's so much I want.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Let me pick that. Let me put that to the side because that must be.
We'll come back to that.
Yes. So mission, Or
Yeah.
yes.
So Catholic Charities USA is an umbrella organization that exists for resource sharing, for support. They do a lot of advocacy in Washington, D.C. on the federal level. They've got a new project, which I'm super excited about, where they're going to be collecting stories from all over the U.S. and then they're going to have like a bus that's going to travel out. It's going to be pretty cool. So that they do sort of national things. And just as I go to Washington, to check in with them, Carrie Robinson goes to the Vatican, because every country has a country leader of their Catholic charities. In most places, it goes by the Latin word caritas. All the caritas leaders on a national level come together in Rome and do the same thing that we do on the national level, talk about the challenges that they're seeing, talk about the ways that their Catholic charities are trying to respond, all of that. So, but it is a group that exists for cooperation, not for direction. So in every diocese, I don't think we're doing anything at our Catholic Charities that somebody isn't doing at another Catholic Charities in the U.S., but nobody has our exact mix of programs. Mm-hmm. And partly that's because every diocese is responding to the needs of its local community. But also it's because we're responding to what else exists in our community. So like in a lot of places, Catholic Charities operates a homeless shelter. And I don't do that at our Catholic Charities because St. Vincent de Paul is already here in our community and they operate a big homeless shelter. Yeah. Lots of Catholic Charities have a foster care and adoption program. And I don't do that at our Catholic Charities because St. Joe's Children's Home is already in that work. So if there's somebody else within our diocese who is doing the work and in conjunction with our Catholic social teaching, right? Whether they're explicitly Catholic or just an organization that we know is, in line with our teaching and values, then you don't need me to do that work, right? Like I can focus on something else because of course there's so many things that need to be done. There's a limited amount of resources with which to do it. So choosing where we're going to engage is really that factor of what are the greatest needs and what else is already being addressed by other people within our community.
That's amazing.
So, what would you say is the biggest program in terms of funding and resources out of the Catholic Charities of Louisville?
So we have, depending on how you're counting, 9 or 10 different programs. And historically, our largest program for quite some time has been Refugee Resettlement. It's not a majority of our staff, but it's probably half.
Wow.
Yeah. And that is a program that we started here in Louisville in the 70s, which was really when the bishops first got involved on the national scale at a pretty large level. And it was at the time of the Vietnam War, obviously. So there were lots of displaced people in Southeast Asia. And so that was really sort of the beginning of that work. And at that time here in Louisville, Catholic Charities really historically had been focused on adoption, infant adoption. So there were different maternity homes and orphanages. And so we were doing a lot with that. But of course, the culture was changing at that time, right? It was no longer a situation where a young woman who was pregnant and not married, went to a maternity home and had a baby. Things were changing. And also the state was getting involved in the foster care system in a way that had not historically been the case. Yeah. And so the need for what had been our primary service was sort of dying away. And this other opportunity was, the bishops were looking for places that wanted to get involved in refugee resettlement. Yeah. And so we stepped in that time. And really, it's been an amazing success story. I love to say this to people, but Louisville is great at refugee resettlement. And I think it's for 2 reasons. Part is because of the size of the city. It's big enough. We have resources like Home of the Innocents, right? So if a family has a child with serious medical needs, like they can live in Louisville and their child can be cared for here, right? That's not going to be the case necessarily in a much smaller community. Usually, if you want that kind of support, or a children's hospital, or other kinds of a school system, a public school system that has a newcomer academy and works with it, usually you might be thinking you got to go to much larger cities. Those much larger cities typically have much higher costs of living. Right. So we're at a good sweet spot there. The other thing I think we're really in the sweet spot around is that Louisville is both a Southern city and a Catholic city. And there really aren't any others of those except for New Orleans, which kind of has its own thing going on, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
You think about a big southern city, you think about Atlanta, you think about Nashville. Those are not Catholic cities.
No, they're not.
Not to say there aren't some Catholics there, but those are not Catholic cultures in that city.
Southern Catholics, yeah.
But if you think about Catholic cities, you think about, Pittsburgh or Chicago or Boston,
Midwest,
which God love them.
East.
That is not typically a welcoming culture.
Correct.
So we have this unique fusion of being both a city that thinks about the worldwide church, because I think that's part of our DNA as Catholics, is to recognize that the whole world is our brothers and sisters. And also has this deep tradition of Southern hospitality where if you're here, we want you to feel at home. We want to make you welcome. Yeah. What can we do for you?
There's also this strangeness about Louisville and Kentucky in general, that we were like a neutral state in the Civil War. We're in the middle of the country, but we're not so far west that we don't have origins at the very dawn of this country. So we're still, we're the 15th state in the Union. And so that culture also exists where there's this tension, this on top of, just the... There's this, I think, as you mentioned, in the 70s, people weren't seeking as much the needs for adoption and maybe fostering and maternity homes and things. And some of that was need, but some of that was like just a lack of maybe a desire for it, a lack of understanding of family needs and stuff. So it allowed for a new shift in focus, I think, for Catholic Charities to welcome the stranger,
And it has, I think, contributed to a culture in the city where people are really proud of our international city, right? That you can get food from so many different cultures here, that people live all over this city who come from so many different places. People recognize that now and they believe in it and they're proud of it. And that, again, makes us a really welcoming place. So a lot of people, we have historically resettled a significant number of people into Louisville, but also there's a measure that gets talked about in the resettlement world. It's called secondary migration, which is that people were originally resettled in Houston. And then they pack up a year and a half later and they move to Louisville. So our secondary in-migration rate is very high. Wow. Our secondary out-migration rate is minute. Wow. People who come here love it and want to be here.
I've never, outside of Atlanta, I've never been to a community where you have like second generation Zimbabweans and Rwandans. I go, like, where? Like, I thought that was just like a Atlanta, Houston thing. Louisville. And maybe you can explain to us like the concept of that is it's either Kentucky or Louisville is like a tier 1 refugee center.
Yeah. So we have been historically one of the largest refugee resettlement sites in the country for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops.
Wow.
And they have been historically the largest partner with the State Department. So and in addition to Catholic Charities, you also have Kentucky Refugee Ministries, which started doing this work 15 or 20 years after we did, and has become one of the largest partners, if not the largest partner, in their own national network, which is called Church World Service. So Louisville, Kentucky as a whole, typically is in the top 5 states nationally when it comes to accepting refugee arrivals, which is pretty phenomenal if you think about it, because that's not per capita, that's total. And the others in the top 5 are like Texas, California, New York, Washington State.
Huge.
And again, the number of people that they have compared to the number of people that we have, I mean, that's amazing. Usually Kentucky's in the top 5 of something. It's like heart attack risk factors, most, child abuse. I mean, this is which is terrible, right? This is we are good at this. We are good at this. We've been doing this really well for a really long time. And so much so that the USCCB has always, for 30 years, has been able to turn to us as the partner when they do have, one of these tricky situations. They've got a family of 9 and a special needs child, right? Where are they going to send that person? They're going to send them to Louisville, right? Wow. What they know that we can handle tough situations and complex family dynamics and, medical needs and all of these other things because we've been doing it for a really long time.
Yeah, my wife works at the Kentucky School for the Blind, so
it's another great example, right? Yeah. So it is, I think, a human tragedy that right now there are no refugee arrivals to the United States. And we don't expect that to change anytime in the foreseeable future.
So to the extent, let's tackle it this way. So refugee resettlement is the biggest program statistically of Catholic Charities, since, January of this year, that's been zeroing out more or less.
Yep.
How is that affecting your ability to service the immigrant communities currently here?
Yeah.
And maybe we're in the process of maybe receiving maybe other family members, or maybe you're having trouble servicing their needs now, either due to kind of administrative uncertainty and funding.
So there's a couple different levels here. Let me try to take them one at a time. Sure. So one, on January 20th, we had 92 people who were assured. That means they had gone through the 2 to 3 year security screening process with the State Department overseas. They had been approved. They had plane tickets that had been purchased for them with State Department funds. They were selling their belongings. They were ready to get on the plane and come to the United States. Those 92 people did not come, and we don't know if they'll ever be able to come. Most of those folks here in Louisville were family reunifications. So we're talking about a situation where, mom and the kids got through the resettlement process first and are here, and they're waiting for dad and one or two of the other siblings, and they're not coming. So that's the human cost, right? Not to mention people whose families weren't that far into the process, but you got here in December and you couldn't wait to get your paperwork filed and get your family brought to join you. So that's the immediate, and the real tragedy of it all. But on the bigger picture scale, we provide services to newly arriving refugees. They get really intense services for about the first 90 days. And those are funded through our relationship with the bishops, which, frankly, we have not been paid on for work going as far back as December because the bishops have not been paid, right? We submit our reports and the invoice to the bishops. They review it. They submit it to the federal government. They have not been paid. They don't have the money to give to us. And the whole is about $600,000, which is significant.
If you're multiplying that across multiple agencies.
Yeah. Again, we're one of the largest, but still there are many others. The network is about 80 agencies within the bishop's network.
So we're experiencing a dramatic shift right now.
So we can carry, not forever, but I do think that, they've got litigation ongoing. I do think they'll eventually get paid and we'll eventually get paid. But the folks who were doing that work, they don't have more work to do, right? We're not getting new arriving refugees. So I don't need a team of people whose job is to meet you at the airport and set up your apartment and do all of these things for you. So we have had to reduce some staff positions. We have had to reduce 14 positions, some of whom were able to find jobs. We had other openings within Catholic Charities that they were able to move into, but some of whom, we had to let go. All of the other folks who are employed within our Migration and Refugee Services team are funded through a different mechanism. So refugees get that intense 90 days of service, but they're entitled to services for 2 to 5 years after arrival, depending on their family circumstances. And those longer term services tend to focus on employment, healthcare, and education. Working with kids in the school system, helping parents. Almost everybody gets employed within 90 days after arrival, working age adults. But after you came and we got you your first job at Amazon, within a year and a half, you've got some English and you're ready to maybe think about your next job, right? Like something that's a little maybe more in line with your previous job skills or something along the. So
because I think that's one of the biggest barriers, just the language barrier.
Absolutely. Yeah. So English classes, employment. youth work. So those longer term services are funded by a congressional appropriation that's done on a state by state basis. And so those funds, we actually are the recipient in Kentucky for all of those funds for the entire state. In some places, it's a function of state government in most states, but Kentucky and about 10 other states a long time ago devolved that function out to a nonprofit. And in almost all the other states, it's the Catholic Charities that stepped in to do that role. So we receive and manage those funds. And thus far, knock on wood, those funds have continued to flow. And so we're receiving those funds and we're continuing to provide those services. We hope and anticipate that that will continue because folks are here, right? People are already here in our community.
You have to figure out what to do.
And yeah, we don't want
to serve them. Yeah.
Whether you've been here for 3 months or 3 years, we don't want to leave you high and dry. We want you to assimilate into our community. It's better for our community and it's better for you. So, keeping those funds hopefully keeping those funds rolling, which in the last Trump administration they did. Obviously, it's a new world. It's a different administration. It's a different Congress than it was the last time. But I'm hopeful that that will continue. We probably will reduce services somewhat because, of course, people will drop off. People are going to hit their end of service mark and roll out.
And you just won't renew or re-up.
Yeah.
So the two questions. So one, how much of your funding is made up from donations, right? Community donations, organizational donations, pledges, etc.
Not just government funding.
Yeah.
And not just government funding.
Well, the percentage answer for that is deceptive, and it's because of that Kentucky Office of Refugees money that I mentioned, right? If you just look at our whole budget, it's like $70 million or something. We're not keeping the vast majority of that money, right?
Goodness.
We're passing that through as the recipient of the federal funds. We get all the money that's going to all the school systems in the state. So we're passing money to JCPS. We're passing money to the Warren County schools. There's a big resettlement agency in Bowling Green, right? So all of that money is flow through money. So really our spend is more like 20 million, like the money that we're actually using.
Still a lot, but that's a lot of overhead with employees.
It is.
As well.
And so one of our big challenges right now is going to be that as we're reducing these fully federally funded positions, on every position that we have, regardless of how it's funded, we budget an indirect cost, right? The operating overhead for the agency. And then that's mostly what pays for the administrative spine of the agency, right? The finance team, the HR team, the facilities guy, the electric bill. We're not going to have that because we're going to lose a lot of money off the positions that we're eliminating, that we will no longer have that available for our indirect cost pool. What that's meant historically is that when people have given unrestricted gifts to Catholic Charities, right? Not to a specific program or anything, but just given to Catholic Charities. We've been able to use historically almost 100% of that for programming. We're not going to be able to do that now. Because unless we're able to draw other funding sources for some of the programs that have historically run at a deficit, right? The restricted funding for those programs is not sufficient to operate the program. We've made up the deficit with funds that now, at least some of them, are going to need to be used to keep the lights on. I can reduce a little bit, but we were not fluffy to start with, right? This was not an organization that had, lots of spare.
Contrary to certain beliefs, but
we run pretty lean. Yeah. So, I have had 2 people in HR. I'm not going to need 2 people. I can say this because my HR guy is retiring. So reducing one position, everybody knows. It's totally fine. Yeah. He knows this is like a long time plan. But, I can reduce one position down out of that department. But I have to have one, right? I still have to have, I have over 100 people working for me. I still have to have one person in HR. So, wow. There's only so much I can cut. There's only so much I can pull back that nobody's going to miss. And so that means, unfortunately, that if we're not able to increase general donations, then we'll have to reduce services, which is the worst possible time to do that. This is not, things are getting rough and they're going to continue to get rougher. And we need to be there for people, but we're going to have more limited resources with which to do that.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges is people might face is this barrier that people put up. If you don't speak the language, you can't relate to them, and that's a thing that I think people allow to be part of the problem. But as you said, you want people to assimilate into the culture, and I think there's that fear that these people that are not from here won't assimilate, will refuse to do so, and they'll be somehow a threat. And that's the weird tension I think that people have in the reasoning, and I think a lot of it's because of the whole, people who are abusive or criminals or the illegal people who do it for nefarious purposes.
Small
and those
percentage.
That's a smaller percentage, right? And I get what that fear is, but I'm also in the space of like, what is the essence? What is the word charity mean? You've said caritas. You were referring to both Pope Benedict's encyclical, which in Latin is Deus et caritas, but it means God is love.
Right.
And caritas is love. So it's Catholic Charities, and a lot of times, and this is why I don't like it when people say, well, you got to show people charity. Because people have a certain attitude or understanding of the word charity in the sense of, well, I just give money to a nonprofit, or I give money to the homeless, or whatever. And it's charity in a disembodied, objectified category.
Right.
Right. And charity is love. Technically, your organization could be more culturally understood if you were named Catholic Love. Yeah. Right. Yeah. In a way that was understood as service, but in a way that's more human, more encounter-based, right? Where you're actually willing to connect with the person's heart, their humanity, their dignity. That, to me, is a way to bridge the gap of these barriers or perceptions.
So let me say two things. Number one, your first point about the way that people are concerned about who's coming, how will they assimilate. Yeah. That is almost exactly the same way that our ancestors were greeted when they came here to Louisville. Right. In fact, Father Mike Tobin, who's the pastor at St. Rita's Church.
He's my pastor.
Is he?
Yeah, I go to St. Luke. And
he was on our board, just rolled off and has kind of stayed on with us in this unofficial chaplain capacity.
He just took on some other big responsibilities.
He's got a lot going on.
Yeah.
Came down to Catholic Charities earlier this week and gave a presentation in the lunchroom for our staff at lunchtime about Bloody Monday and what it meant here in Louisville, 100 and almost 200 years ago, to be an immigrant, to be a German or Irish Catholic immigrant in this city, and how people were being perceived and not welcomed, and the rise of the know-nothings and what that led to in terms of the riots and everything else, and putting the tension that we're seeing today very much in this historical context. And that's one thing that I think that's why Louisville's identity as a Catholic city is important to its identity as a welcoming city, because many of us are Catholic and know that was my family. Literally, my family was here at that time, and we were the ones that they didn't want here. And look at it today, that it's no different. The story is the same. The reasons that people fled their homes in the 1840s are the same reasons that people are feeling the call to leave their homelands and start over in the United States.
Yeah, because it's not like these people are wanting to leave their heritage and their comfort. They're being forced to because of all kinds of war
just like the Jews didn't want to leave there.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to mention, you talk about Catholic love. Remember, the opposite of love is not hate; it's fear. Yeah. And Jesus tells us over and over and over, do not fear.
Perfect love casts out fear.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And so, if you're afraid of the other, whether the other is someone with a different skin tone and a different language and a different cultural heritage, or if the other is the guy standing on the side of the road with the sign, whatever that is, remember, that's your fear is contrary to your gospel call.
JP2 said it as well. Be not afraid. That was the opening words of his papal inauguration address.
Right. He wrote a wonderful book with that whole theme. Right.
Right.
Be not afraid.
So you would describe the current climate that your organization is in, or having to weather, is one of let's just say manufactured fear, right? From whatever the source, right? It's not true. to what the mission and the calling is of the organization and the work that it's doing in the community, which benefits not just these people, the foreigner, right, who were called to take care of, scripturally, but the community as a whole, because these people are getting jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Jobs that many Americans
don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I've pointed out. I was in Frankfurt in the fall and had some great conversations with Republican leadership there about what refugee resettlement means to Kentucky as a state, right? And this is my line. Look, sometimes it's hard, you guys know, to convince people from Atlanta or California or wherever that Louisville is a great place to live. You know who's not hard to convince? People from the Congo, people from Cuba. They are delighted. They are so excited and they want to come here. And then when they come here, they like it and they love it and they want to stay. Yeah. The average age of the 10,000 Cubans who've moved to Louisville in the last 5 years is 32. This is an old state, my friends.
Wow.
Getting 10,000 32-year-olds who are here and want to work, that is tremendous.
Yeah.
We couldn't pay for that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a phenomenal opportunity for our state to rebuild its workforce. And we're good at this. So, this opportunity, it's we don't want to let this pass by. We've proven that we can and do a great job at assimilating people of different cultural backgrounds to make Kentucky their home and to love Kentucky. And so, continuing to do that, losing that opportunity is a huge loss for our state.
I think one of the best things anyone could do for themselves is to go to a different country for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And just to see other people and to be in the other country. Like I've gotten to go to the last 5 World Youth Days, and that alone has helped me understand differently. And when I even get in my own comfort zone here, there's this natural tendency to, want people to speak English, want people to have your culture, and you're more at ease, you're more comfortable. And I get that. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be comfortable and at ease, right? But there's also this goal I think Christ has for all of us, that all would be one, right? There's this, and not a unity that's in a utopian worldview, like where we can create the perfect society. That's impossible. Heaven's our ultimate home. We have to remember that. But Mother Teresa said best, it's not eliminating poverty, it's loving the poor.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, the poor will always be with you. Right? You're not going to change everything. But and Archbishop Bob, we interviewed him in our first episode on Spirit and Power a couple of years ago when he first became Archbishop, and he used the analogy of 2 people standing on a beach, and a guy picks up a starfish and throws it in the ocean. The other guy says, that's not going to make any difference. He said, yeah, but it made a difference for that starfish.
Right.
And that's all that you're saying. Yeah. For the people who are here that we can serve, like, how can we actually treat them like people and not objects or threats or labels?
It's funny because going back to that gargantuan statement, which I think the audience should pay attention to, is that the Archbishop is over all people, not just Catholics within the diocese, and your organization is over serving all people, not
Told
just
you we'd come back to that.
Catholics. I guess the harsh thing is that, which Jesus pointed out when he began his ministry, when he did the famous scene, mic drop scene, when he read the Isaiah scroll in the synagogue. He's like, and Elijah came first to the Samaritan and not to the people of Israel. And they were about to get it. I'm like, because why is it that we get mad that we see services, or not we, but many are upset, that services extended to the foreigner, to the other, right? It's been universal throughout time, right? But is there a lesson in that the foreigner is more receptive to those services, or rather they're more in need of those services than
Gentiles?
Well, and it's who has the need. You guys have probably heard the analogy of, you got a house on fire and a house not on fire, and they're only spraying the house on fire. Are you going to get mad? Like, you're not spraying my house, right? Well, your house is not currently on fire. Right. We're helping the one that is. But, also, I mean, this is don't want to downplay our work to the immigrant community because it's a big piece of who we are at Catholic Charities. But we have a lot of other programs as well. I mentioned already on in this talk, our work with the folks in long-term care facilities, our work in the West End at our food pantry.
Absolutely.
We have another big food pantry that's down near Churchill Downs. We have community garden sites. We have the Indigent burial program that we operate with the city of Louisville, where anybody who passes away in Jefferson County, a resident of Jefferson County who has neither funds nor family.
Is that the Joseph of Arimathea Society?
Yeah.
I did that in high school.
Did you?
I went to DeSales.
Yeah, so now all of the Catholic high schools locally have those Joseph of Arimathea societies.
Yeah, I'll never forget that experience.
Yeah,
Very
I mean,
powerful.
so it is tremendously powerful that everybody who passes away in our community is laid to rest with an individual prayer service.
Wow.
Somebody's there for you. And lots of cities don't have that. Like we're a model there. I mean, that you are one of our volunteers who's been doing this for years. He'll say, everybody's held when you come into this world and we hold you on the way out.
No potter's fields,
right.
like,
I mean, it's the city's own cemetery, but it's not a mass grave, right? It's an individual burial. Or if it's cremation, we bury the ashes, but everybody gets an individual prayer service with pallbearers from our local Catholic high schools. If we know anything about the person, we try to respect their religious tradition, but a lot of times we don't know. They may not have had a tradition at all.
Right.
So our default is our Catholic tradition.
Of course, right.
But so the average person who is a recipient of those services, I think I would have assumed that it was going to be like a homeless person. It's not. It's a white man in his 60s or 70s. Some of them lived at home by themselves, and some of them lived in long-term care. That's typically what we see. So we know through that work, the ombudsman work that we do, 2/3 of people in Kentucky long-term care facilities don't have regular visitors.
No.
And it's funny you mentioned that one house is on fire, the other's not. I wonder if everyone's house is on fire and you're just trying to help the people who are losing everything all at one time.
Right.
And there's only so much you can do. There's only so much time and space. Because white people are hurting too, if you want to look at it as white versus everybody else. But it's not that. It's more. But the ironic thing that a white guy in his 60s and 70s who has no one. Yeah. We're talking about the breakdown of the family. Right. Breakdown of marriages. Right. Broken relationships. Or
another thing to realize is, some of those folks do have people, but their people can't afford a funeral.
And that's so painful to hear. Yeah.
So there's that. And then there's the people who have outlived their family members. Maybe they were never married. Maybe their wife has already passed. Maybe they had kids. Their kids are across the country. They've become estranged for whatever reason. You don't know. I mean, there's so many different things that could go into that. Yeah. But it is such a sad, it's a sad statement. But I love that we do this program, and that if you do have people who love you but can't take on that financial burden, they can come. Right, they'll be at the service. There was somebody. This was at least a year ago, but I just thought it was so great. The man's neighbors all came to the service. They were not financially able to bury him, but they loved him. Yeah. Right. So they came. They were there.
That's beautiful.
Right. And that's there was a mother. This was tragic. Passed away and left 6 kids. The kids were able to be there. Right. I mean, we can make the goodbye at least a little. You had that opportunity to say goodbye to this person that you loved, even though you don't financially have the means to
make it happen. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I have one final question, Lisa, because I think it speaks to this need. Like, we want to serve the people who are living. We want to serve the people who are dying. We want to serve everyone through that spirit of love. But there's this tension in the church, not just the corporal versus spiritual, but related maybe. It's that Mary Martha complex, and I loved what you said of, in your own discernment to join Catholic Charities at your position, like you had to look at Mother Mary, right? Mm-hmm. That receptive posture of go where the Lord guides you, right? But then that Mary and Martha, the sisters, that being versus doing, that idea that people oftentimes pit the two sisters against each other. And I don't think Jesus is doing that in the gospel. I think he's trying to say, you have to be inspired through listening to the master first Be filled with love, because you can't give what you don't have.
Yeah.
Martha, you're worried about and anxious about many things. There's only need for one thing. And so when you get caught up in serving everybody and trying to solve all the problems, you can get burnt out and you become a jaded social worker who hates people. And that's not why you got into the business to begin with. Right. And so, like, can you speak to the need for prayer and receptivity to the Holy Spirit, and especially the Catholic? How do you handle the weight of the needs of others as a Catholic? Wait, what do you do in your own prayer life? Yeah. What is your lifestyle to actually be able not to get burnt out?
Yeah. So first, I love that you brought up Mary and Martha, because I was just in Washington, and the first day we had Mass, the days that we were there, the first day the Mass was with the Archbishop, or the Bishop of Arlington, Virginia, which is where the building actually sits. And it was great. And that was his, he talked about Mary and Martha, and he made a point I've never thought of before, which is that Jesus didn't tell Martha to sit down. He didn't say, come join Mary, never mind making the meal. He said, just don't worry about it so much.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the work still has to get done. Yeah. Everybody still needs to get fed. Hospitality still needs to happen.
Yeah. The Brady Bunch.
You just don't need to be worrying about this, right? Like, just relax. Like, remember that this is, so I loved that. I thought that was so great.
What brings union to the sisters, to the family.
Yeah. So I think it does fit in there. And this couple of days when I was in Washington with my fellow diocesan directors, we talked so much about prayer. In addition to having this daily Mass, we were praying, but we were all talking about, like, what are you doing in your agency? How are you addressing this very difficult time with staff? Everyone is stressed. Like, what are you doing? And over, what everyone kept saying was, it's about prayer. Someone had Mass at their headquarters. Someone had their building blessed. People were we had Father Mike come in. Like, all of the people were returning to prayer as being so essential. And just for me personally, so our office is down on East Broadway. It's a couple blocks from Martin of Tours, which you all may know has
that's right.
perpetual adoration. Yeah. I drop my daughter off at school at St. Agnes and drive down Barrett to Broadway pretty much every day. And whenever I can, which lately it's several times a week, I'm stopping in there in the morning, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever I can do, just to spend a little time with the Lord and say, in a paraphrase of John the 23rd, this is your agency. So I hope you know what you're doing. You've got a plan. You tell me where we're going. I want to do what you want me to do. I can't be navigating this by myself. This is yours. You're leading.
Right there.
You're doing this where we're going. So, and that has been really, it has been a great source of peace for me.
You just let go. Like, you're not, you don't, you gave it to me to take care of, but I'm not in charge.
Right. Exactly.
You're the head, you're the boss, you're the head honcho. You know what you're doing. Yeah. You know what's best.
Gosh, Lisa, what you just said right there, I think just screams in my heart. And I think will connect with so many people in our audience who, like, there's just such a awareness in the church that people are leaving the church. Like, I heard a statistic recently, 800 people are leaving the church to the 100 people who are joining.
Wow.
And that's scary. That's disheartening. And there's this desire, like, what else do you do but pray? And why haven't we been praying more? Yeah. And yet there's also this tension of, well, you can't just pray, you got to serve. Yeah. And that tension of, like, negativity. I grew up with some of that. Like, people would say, well, Catholic Charities just focuses on programs and projects to serve all these people, but there's no real focus on teaching the faith and prayer and all. And it's like,
it is the faith.
But they're not opposed to each other.
Right.
There's this union, and you just by sitting in prayer shows as a beautiful example to everyone who will hear this that Catholic Charities is steeped in prayer. And it is only from that you are able to serve effectively the needs of the people who may or may not be Catholic, may or may not understand their own humanity or their own relation with Jesus, may not even know who Jesus is. But they're still a person created in his image and likeness. And he's, remember, the big boss.
That's right.
Right? And I thank you so much for this time. It's been very enlightening.
It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this, guys.
Beautiful.
Thanks for having me.
Beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Chuck, you got any final questions?
What can we do to blast to our audience on ways that we can help Catholic Charities get involved with the programs that you have?
the number one thing, and just to take your point, is please, if you're hearing this, pray for us. Pray for my staff. Pray for our clients. Pray for anybody who needs us that hasn't found us yet. But keep us in prayer. I hate when people say, you're just praying for them. That is huge, and it's so important. And knowing, for me, for my staff, for our clients, knowing that people are praying for us is tremendous. So that's the first and most important thing. But if people want to give of their time or give of their treasure, you go to the Catholic Charities website, cclu.org. We take donations, obviously cash, but also in-kind donations. There's a volunteer page for whatever your ability is, whether you want like a longer term, ongoing connection, like to mentor young refugees. That's wonderful. But if you've only got a Saturday afternoon, we'll take that too. We have so many different programs. There's so many different ways that people engage. If you want to get out there and help us clean up some of the garden sites, here in the early spring, that is awesome. If you want to, come down and sort things in the food pantry, we can always use help getting stuff off the trucks. Whatever your availability is, I can promise you we can find something for you to do.
And we'll have that website and links all in the show notes and in descriptions on all the platforms as well too.
Yeah.
And Lisa, I just thank you again, because it brings union in the church, which is so necessary. Like, there's been such disunion for so long. It has felt like that in some ways. And I think we're starting to find after a lot of cultural changes, that we have to band together. We have to work together. We have to listen to each other. It's that accompaniment.
Yeah.
And it's through the union in the church we find solidarity in the world, or give the space for the world to actually work together as well. And we're doing this 9-year novena called the Great Novena leading up to 2033, and it's an official group under the Office of Worship with Dr. Shadle. And we have an official prayer. The Archbishop has blessed our efforts in that way, so keep us in prayer. But the whole goal of the Great Novena is to lead to 2033 and build that unity in the church again, just through awareness and in a way that can really uplift people and help people to pray, but through prayer, inspire action to both build small groups, but also, help people see these bigger initiatives in the Archdiocese and throughout the world, so they can be part of something bigger than themselves and build their faith, so that all their regular everyday experiences they can see as icons and not as idols.
I love it.
So pray for us. We'll pray for you. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So Chuck, close us out. Right to the camera. It's his first time, everybody. It's his first time. We gotta give him a little bit. It's all good.
Thank you everyone for joining us here on Spirit Inspired, and to our lovely guest, Lisa DeJaco Crutcher, Chief Executive Officer of Catholic Charities of Louisville. We'll see you next time.